So remember the Gripen, the Swedish fighter jet that Donald Trump called overrated, the same jet that humbled American pilots in the Arctic Trident exercise, that achieved near-peer exchange ratios against the F-35, that costs a seventh as much per flight hour to operate, that can be rearmed and refueled in 10 minutes on a highway strip by 6 people. The plane that proved expensive does not mean best. That Gripen has a secret. A secret that the pilots who flew against it did not mention in their debriefings. A secret that most defense analysts gloss over in their assessments. A secret that gives the United States of America a kill switch. A literal operational kill switch over every Gripen ever built, every Gripen ever sold, and every Gripen that will ever fly. The engine. The Gripen's engine is American. The GE F414 turbofan manufactured by General Electric in Lynn, Massachusetts, is the sole power plant in every Gripen E and F variant in existence. It is subject to international traffic and arms regulations, the U.S. export control framework that gives Washington effective veto power over the sale, export, maintenance, and operation of any product containing American-controlled defense technology. The plane is Swedish. The radar is Swedish. The weapons are European. The electronic warfare suite is Swedish. But the heart, the single component that makes the aircraft fly, is American, and America controls it. Sweden designed a fighter to defend a small nation's sovereignty, and the engine that powers that fighter can be grounded by a signature in Washington. That was the reality until last week, because Rolls-Royce, the British aerospace engine manufacturer, one of the 3 largest jet engine producers on Earth, just announced a breakthrough that changes everything. A new generation military turbofan engine that can replace the GE F414 as a direct drop-in alternative in the Gripen airframe. 0 American components, 0 ITAR-controlled parts, 0 Washington veto power. And Canada, which has spent 2 years building a defense architecture entirely independent of the United States, has committed $2.4 billion as co-development partner, ordered the Rolls-Royce-powered Gripen as its next-generation fighter, and established a Canadian manufacturing facility for engine components that makes Canada a permanent node in the first advanced Western fighter ecosystem that operates completely outside American control. Warren Buffett said the Rolls-Royce engine proves the law he has applied to every monopoly he has ever studied. Every choke point gets bypassed. Every dependency gets broken. Every monopoly creates the incentive for its own replacement. The only question is when. And for the American fighter engine monopoly, the answer is now. But the line that is circulating through every defense ministry on Earth, the line Carney delivered when asked why Canada invested in the Rolls-Royce Gripen program, is 9 words that captured what defense sovereignty actually means when it stops being a slogan and becomes a material reality. Sovereignty means no one else holds the key to your cockpit. When you understand how the United States controls the Gripen through its engine, why that control is the ultimate choke point in military aviation, what Rolls-Royce built, and why it changes the global fighter market permanently, how Canada positioned itself at the center of the liberated Gripen ecosystem, what Buffett said about why every monopoly funds its own replacement, and what a world of ITAR-free fighters means for American defense influence, you will understand why this is not just an engine announcement. It is the moment the last chain connecting Allied air power to American permission was cut. Hit subscribe because the fighter jet that proved expensive does not mean best just broke free of the country that tried to control it, and the global fighter market will never be the same. Let me show you the dependency that almost nobody talks about because it is the dependency that made the Gripen's celebrated independence an illusion. The General Electric F414 is a 10,000 lb thrust class afterburning turbofan engine, originally developed for the FA-18EF Super Hornet and adapted for the Gripen EF. It is the Gripen's sole engine. The aircraft is a single-engine fighter, meaning without the F-414, the Gripen does not fly. Every engine delivered to Saab for installation in a Gripen airframe, every spare engine held in reserve, every replacement turbine blade, every maintenance module, every line replaceable unit in the propulsion system originates from General Electric's facility in Lynn, Massachusetts, and is subject to the international traffic and arms regulations. ITAR is the invisible architecture of American defense influence, and most people have never heard of it. Here is what it means in practice. Any product containing ITAR-controlled components requires U.S. State Department approval for every sale to a foreign government, every transfer between nations, and every maintenance transaction involving controlled technology. The F-414 is ITAR-controlled. Therefore, every Gripen is ITAR-entangled. Saab, a Swedish company building a Swedish fighter for Swedish sovereignty, cannot sell a single Gripen to any nation on Earth without the approval of the United States State Department. If Washington disapproves of a potential buyer for political, strategic, or commercial reasons, the sale is blocked, not by Sweden, by Washington. The dependency extends beyond sales into every dimension of operations. Gripen operators must maintain their engines through GE-approved facilities, using GE-approved parts following GE-approved procedures. If the United States restricts maintenance access through sanctions, through political disputes, through the kind of trade war escalation that has defined the last 2 years, or simply through bureaucratic delay in approving routine export licenses, Gripen operators face grounded aircraft with no alternative path to returning them to flight. Engine overhaul required every 800 to 1,200 flight hours, depending on operational conditions, requires manufacturer-controlled proprietary data that GE holds exclusively. Without GE's active cooperation, an operator cannot overhaul its own engines. The aircraft becomes a wasting asset, flying until the engine reaches its maintenance limit, then sitting on a ramp indefinitely while a foreign company in a foreign country decides whether to provide the technical data needed to fix it. The operator, a sovereign nation with pilots trained, missions assigned, and territory to defend, waits for permission from Lynn, Massachusetts. And the strategic contradiction at the center of it all is precise enough to be absurd. The entity that controls the Gripen's engine is the same entity that profits from the Gripen's primary competitor. General Electric is a major propulsion contractor for the F-35 program through its broader GE Aviation portfolio. The company that decides whether the Gripen's heart keeps beating has a direct financial interest in the Gripen's rival succeeding. The fox is not merely guarding the henhouse. The fox owns the henhouse's ventilation system. Nations that bought the Gripen for sovereignty reasons, Brazil, South Africa, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Thailand, bought sovereignty that was conditional on American approval. The plane was independent, the engine was not. And independence with an American kill switch attached is not independence. It is a lease. And to understand why the engine, specifically the engine and not any other component, gives Washington this extraordinary power, you need to understand something about fighter jets that most people never consider. A fighter jet is a system of systems: radar, weapons, avionics, electronic warfare, communications, structures, and propulsion. Most of those systems can be sourced from multiple manufacturers. Sweden makes world-class radars, MBDA makes the Meteor missile, Saab builds its own electronic warfare suite. Avionics can be domestically developed or sourced from non-American suppliers. If any single one of those systems needed replacement, Saab could find an alternative within years, not decades. But the engine is different. A military turbofan engine operating at the performance level required by a modern fighter, temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius in the combustion chamber, turbine blades rotating at tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, thrust-to-weight ratios that define the aircraft's speed, range, altitude ceiling, and combat agility, reliability measured in thousands of hours of operation under the most demanding conditions engineering has ever produced, is the single most technologically difficult component in aerospace. There are exactly 5 companies on Earth that can build a fighter engine of the F-414's class: General Electric, Pratt & Whitney, Rolls-Royce, Safran, and a small number of others with more limited portfolios. You cannot improvise a fighter engine. You cannot substitute one with a commercial alternative. You cannot develop one from scratch in less than a decade without pre-existing institutional knowledge accumulated over generations of engineering. The engine is the ultimate choke point because it is the ultimate irreplaceable, the one component where the number of possible suppliers can be counted on one hand, and where the switching cost is measured not in dollars, but in years. Every other component in the Gripen could be freed from American dependency through engineering effort and time. The engine was the lock and the key was in Washington's pocket. And then Rolls-Royce changed the equation permanently. Rolls-Royce, the British company that powers the Eurofighter Typhoon with the EJ200, that has built military turbofans for over 7 decades, that employs some of the most experienced jet engineers alive at its facilities in Derby, Bristol, and across the United Kingdom, announced the development of a new generation military turbofan designed from inception as a direct replacement for the GE F-414 in the Gripen airframe. The engine, designated the RM-16, produces $23,000 lbs of afterburning thrust, exceeding the F-414's output by approximately 5%. Its specific fuel consumption is improved by an estimated 8%, meaning greater range or greater endurance on the same fuel load, a meaningful advantage for a fighter designed for extended Arctic patrols and long-range deployments. Its maintenance interval is designed at 1,400 flight hours between overhauls compared to the F-414's approximately 1,000, a 40% improvement that reduces the lifetime maintenance burden and the operational cost per hour. And it is engineered from inception to be a physical drop-in replacement for the F-414 in the Gripen EF airframe. Identical mounting points, identical accessory drive interfaces, identical inlet and exhaust dimensions, minimizing the airframe modification required for engine swap to a level that Saab engineers described as a maintenance procedure, not a redesign. The critical specification is not thrust, not fuel consumption, not maintenance interval. It is the one that matters more than all others combined. 0 American components, 0 ITAR-controlled parts, 0 U.S. export control entanglement of any kind. The RM-16 is designed, developed, tested, and manufactured entirely within United Kingdom and European Union jurisdiction, using supply chains that contain no American origin-controlled technology. A Gripen powered by the RM-16 contains no American-controlled technology whatsoever. None. The chain is cut. The lock is open. The key is no longer in Washington's pocket. Rolls-Royce built the engine because the math demanded it. The global market for an ITAR-free military turbofan in the 10,000 lb thrust class is worth an estimated 40 to 60 billion over the engine's 30-year production life, covering new-build Gripens, retrofit of the existing fleet of over 270 Gripens worldwide, and potential application in future non-American fighter programs. The R&D investment, while substantial, is recoverable within the first decade of production. The engine was not built for political reasons. It was built because the American monopoly on fighter engines in this thrust class created a market opportunity so large that the engineering investment was commercially inevitable. ITAR did not just control the Gripen, it funded its own replacement. And then Canada moved. And the speed and scope of what Ottawa committed revealed that this was not a reaction to the Rolls-Royce announcement. It was a strategy that had been waiting for the announcement to make it possible. Canada's commitment has 3 dimensions, each one designed to embed Canada permanently in the liberated Gripen ecosystem. First, co-development investment. Canada committed $2.4 billion to the RM-16 engine program as a co-development partner, funding a significant portion of the remaining development and initial production costs in exchange for Canadian industrial participation rights, intellectual property access, and guaranteed production allocation. The investment makes Canada a stakeholder in the engine itself, not a customer buying a finished product, but a partner with equity in the technology. Second, launch customer. Canada committed to the Rolls-Royce powered Gripen as the aircraft for its long-delayed fighter replacement program, ordering 88 aircraft to replace the aging CF-18 Hornet fleet. The decision had been pending for years with the F-35 as the presumed frontrunner despite growing resistance within the Canadian defense establishment. The Gripen's ITAR dependency had been cited repeatedly in internal assessments as a strategic concern, a concern that the RM-16 eliminates entirely. The order is the largest fighter procurement in Canadian history and the largest international order for the Gripen to date. Third, manufacturing hub. Canada will establish a Rolls-Royce engine component manufacturing facility in Montreal, a city with one of the deepest aerospace industrial ecosystems in the world, home to Pratt & Whitney Canada, Bombardier Aerospace, CAE, and hundreds of aerospace suppliers. The facility will produce high-pressure turbine blades, combustion liners, and gearbox assemblies for the RM-16, creating approximately 3,200 skilled aerospace manufacturing jobs and making Canada a permanent production node in the ITAR-free fighter engine supply chain. The strategic logic connects every thread of the previous 2 years. The trade war made defense independence from the United States a national security imperative, not a theoretical aspiration, but an operational requirement. The European Defence Compact established the principle that Canada would build its security partnerships outside the American framework. The South Korean submarine deal established the practice, advanced military hardware procured from a non-traditional partner without American involvement. The Rolls-Royce Gripen completes the architecture. Canada's fighter fleet, like its submarine fleet, will operate entirely outside American control. No American engine, no American veto, no American kill switch. The key to the cockpit is Canadian. And Canada's position extends beyond its own fleet. Japan, India, and Australia, all members of the Pacific Atlantic Economic Compact, All evaluating fighter options or potential Gripen customers, Canada's investment in the RM-16 positions it as the gateway for compact nations seeking ITAR-free fighter capability. Canada does not merely buy the Gripen. It becomes the hub of the non-American fighter ecosystem, the nation whose industrial participation, whose manufacturing facilities, and whose strategic framework anchors the emerging alternative to the American-controlled fighter market. And here is why this matters far beyond Canada. Because what Rolls-Royce in Canada just created is not merely an engine or a fighter order. It is an entirely new category of Western military aircraft. Until this moment, every advanced Western fighter jet contained American-controlled components that subjected it to ITAR restrictions to some degree. The F-35 is entirely American. The F-16 and FA-18 are American. Even European fighters, the Eurofighter Typhoon and the Dassault Rafale, use certain American subsystems that create ITAR entanglement in specific configurations. The Gripen, powered by the RM-16, with its already non-American radar, weapons, electronic warfare suite, and avionics, becomes the first advanced Western fighter with genuinely zero American dependency. A complete, combat-proven, exercise-validated aircraft, fully capable across every mission profile and fully free. The market this unlocks is enormous. Nations that have been blocked from purchasing advanced fighters due to US political objections now have access to a world-class platform that requires no American approval. Nations currently operating American fighters who have chafed for years under ITAR restrictions on maintenance, modification, and re-export now have a migration path to a fleet they control entirely. Nations that simply want strategic autonomy, the ability to operate their air force without any foreign government's permission, have an option that has never existed at this capability level. In the existing Gripen fleet, over 270 aircraft in service across 6 nations can be retrofitted with the RM-16s, liberating previously delivered aircraft from ITAR dependency retroactively. Brazil, South Africa, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Thailand, and Sweden itself can swap engines and free their entire fleets. The liberation is not just prospective, it is retroactive. The installed base is the initial market. The global fighter market has now split in two. Tier 1, American-controlled, the F-35, the F-16, the FA-18. Fighters that carry ITAR-controlled components require US export approval for every transaction and subject operators to ongoing American oversight of maintenance, modifications, and re-export decisions. These fighters offer undeniable individual capability. The F-35 remains the most technologically advanced production fighter in the world in certain mission profiles. But they come with strings that are permanently attached to a government that has demonstrated, across 2 years of sustained trade war, its willingness to weaponize every dependency it holds. For nations whose relationship with Washington is deep enough, stable enough, and trusting enough that the dependency is acceptable, the American-controlled tier remains a viable option. But that list of nations, nations that trust Washington enough to let it hold the key to their air force, is shorter today than it was 2 years ago. And it gets shorter with every tariff, every sanction, every weaponized relationship. Tier 2, American-free. The ITAR-free Gripen powered by Rolls-Royce, armed by MBDA, radar, and electronic warfare by Saab. Zero American components, zero export controls, zero veto power. For nations that value sovereignty over their own air force, nations that have experienced ITAR restrictions firsthand, nations that watch the trade war demonstrate what happens when dependencies are exploited, Tier 2 offers something Tier 1 structurally cannot provide: freedom. The freedom to fly when you choose, deploy where you choose, sell to whom you choose, maintain without permission, upgrade without approval, operate your own air force as though it belongs to you, because it does. The choice used to be American or inferior. It is now American or independent. And for a growing number of nations, independent is winning. Warren Buffett addressed it, and his analysis went to the principle that governs every monopoly, every choke point, and every dependency in economic history. Every choke point gets bypassed, Buffett said. Every dependency gets broken. Every monopoly creates the incentive for its own replacement. This is the most reliable law in economics. If you control a choke point, a sole source component, a critical technology, an essential pathway, and you use that control to extract value, to impose conditions, to restrict access, you are simultaneously creating the economic incentive for someone to build an alternative. The higher the rent you charge at the choke point, the greater the reward for bypassing it. And given enough time and enough incentive, the bypass always comes. Always. without exception. The American fighter engine monopoly was a choke point. ITAR was the rent, and Rolls-Royce just built the bypass. He applied it with the specificity of someone who has watched this dynamic eliminate monopolies across every industry. The United States controlled the fighter engine market for decades, not because American engines were the only engines that could be built, but because the cost of building the alternative exceeded the cost of tolerating the restriction. The F-414 worked. It was annoying but manageable. Developing a competitor was expensive, so the choke point held. But every year of ITAR restrictions, every blocked sale, every delayed export approval, every maintenance complication, every moment a sovereign nation discovered its air force could be grounded by a bureaucrat in Washington, added incentive. Incentive compounds the same way interest compounds, silently, invisibly, until one day the accumulated incentive is large enough to fund the bypass. That day came. Rolls-Royce looked at the market, looked at the engineering requirement, looked at the accumulated global demand for an ITR-free fighter engine, and concluded that the investment would generate returns for decades. The monopoly funded its own replacement. The rent built the bypass. He drew the principle outward with the calm of someone stating the obvious. I have watched this in every industry. The railroad that charges monopoly rates until the highway system is built, the telephone company that restricts service until the wireless alternative appears. The cable company that bundles channels nobody watches until streaming arrives. The pattern is identical every single time. The monopolist uses control to extract maximum value, and the extraction creates the economic incentive that funds the alternative. ITAR did not protect the American fighter engine monopoly. ITAR financed its competitor. Every restriction was a deposit in Rolls-Royce's business case. Every blocked sale was a line item in the market analysis that justified the RM-16's development budget. The monopoly built its own replacement. His closing landed with a finality that carried the weight of 7 decades of pattern recognition. Washington controlled every Gripen ever built through one engine manufactured in Massachusetts. They used that control for decades to approve sales they favored, to block sales they did not, to impose conditions on sovereign nations, to maintain leverage over allied air forces. And now a company in Derby, England has built an engine that makes every instrument of that control worthless. Not because Rolls-Royce wanted to undermine American power, but because the incentive to bypass the choke point finally exceeded the cost of building the bypass. That is how every monopoly ends, not with a revolution, with an invoice. The consequences for the United States are immediate, compounding, and irreversible. GE Aviation loses a revenue stream worth billions over the Gripen's remaining production and operational life. Every new build Gripen that uses the RM-16 instead of the F-414 is revenue GE will never see. Every existing Gripen that retrofits, and Saab has announced a retrofit program available to all current operators, is a maintenance and parts revenue stream that disappears permanently. As the ITR-free Gripen gains market traction among nations that previously had no alternative, the F-414's total addressable market contracts, not because the engine is not capable, but because the conditions attached to it are no longer acceptable to buyers who now have a choice. ITAR leverage, the power to approve or deny fighter sales to sovereign nations, a tool of American foreign policy for decades, is eliminated for the Gripen and any future platform that integrates the RM-16 or its derivatives. Nations Washington wants to deny access to advanced fighters can now buy them without asking permission. The export control that gave Washington influence over who has air power and who does not has a hole in it the exact shape of a Rolls-Royce turbofan. And the precedent is the most strategically significant element of all. If the fighter engine choke point can be bypassed, every other American defense technology choke point is on notice. Radar subsystems currently sole-sourced from American manufacturers, missile guidance components, communication encryption modules, satellite navigation receivers. Every ITAR-controlled subsystem that maintains American influence over allied weapons systems now faces the same market dynamic. If the control rent is high enough and the market demand is large enough, someone will build the bypass. Rolls-Royce proved it is possible. The engineering is real, the market is validated, the business case is proven. The next bypass is already being planned in an engineering office somewhere by a team with a spreadsheet showing that the American monopoly on some other critical subsystem has created a market opportunity worth billions for whoever breaks it first. The question is not whether it will happen again. The question is, which choke point falls next and how fast? The American-controlled and American-free tiers of the global fighter market will now compete for every procurement on Earth. And the competition is not on the terms Washington prefers. The F-35 competes on technological sophistication, stealth, sensors, network integration. The ITAR-free Gripen competes on those terms and on sovereignty. No restrictions, no conditions, no foreign government with a kill switch. For nations that trust the United States completely, the F-35 remains the premium choice. For nations that have watched the last 2 years and concluded that American trust is conditional, temporary, and weaponizable, which is, after the trade war, a growing majority of the world, the Gripen offers something the F-35 never can: freedom. The choice that every allied nation now faces at every procurement decision is no longer American or inferior. It is American or independent. And every year that passes, every ITAR restriction that is imposed, every export approval that is delayed, every maintenance transaction that requires Washington's signature, the independent option becomes more attractive. Not because it gets better, but because the cost of the alternative gets more visible. And then Carney addressed it. And for the first time in the entire series of confrontations, he spoke not as a leader reacting to the trade war, but as a leader defining what comes after it. At a defense industrial event in Montreal, Saab's Gripen program director, Rolls-Royce's defense division president, and Canadian aerospace industry leaders assembled behind him. The ARM-16 engine displayed on a stand to his right, a Gripen model in Canadian Air Force livery to his left. Carney spoke with the gravity the moment demanded. He spoke about the Royal Canadian Air Force, the pilots who would fly these aircraft, the maintainers who would keep them in the air, the technicians who would build the engines in the Montreal facility that would anchor Canada's aerospace future for decades. He spoke about the partnership with Rolls-Royce and Saab, the British engineering, the Swedish design philosophy, the Canadian industrial investment that together created something none of them could have built alone. He spoke about what defense sovereignty means, not as rhetoric, not as a political applause line, but as a material engineering reality. That every system in Canada's next-generation fighter is controlled by Canada and its chosen partners. That no foreign government holds leverage over any Canadian weapons system. That the decisions about when Canadian aircraft fly, where they deploy, and who they defend are made in Ottawa and nowhere else. He did not mention the United States. He did not reference ITAR. He did not name the dependency that had been broken. The liberation spoke for itself. A reporter asked, "Prime Minister, why was it important to Canada that its next fighter have no American components?" Carney paused. The engine gleamed under the event lighting to his right. The Gripen model in Canadian colors waited to his left. And he answered with 9 words that every pilot, every defense minister, and every sovereign nation evaluating its fighter options understood the moment they heard them. Sovereignty means no one else holds the key to your cockpit. The room held for a beat, the silence of people absorbing a sentence that will outlast the event, the program, and probably the careers of everyone present. The line did not attack the United States. It did not reference the trade war. It did not name the engine that had been replaced or the company that had been bypassed. It simply stated what sovereignty means when it stops being a word in a speech and becomes a fact in an aircraft. The key to the cockpit, the ability to fly, to fight, to defend, belongs to the nation whose pilots sit in the seat. No one else. Not a foreign manufacturer, not a foreign government, not a foreign export control bureaucracy. The key is yours. And Canada just made sure of it. So here is where we stand. Rolls-Royce has developed a military turbofan engine that replaces the American GE F414 in the Gripen airframe. 0 American components, 0 ITAR restrictions, 0 Washington veto power. Canada has committed $2.4 billion as co-development partner, ordered 88 aircraft, and established a manufacturing facility in Montreal that makes Canada a permanent production node in the ITAR-free fighter ecosystem. The Gripen, the fighter that proved expensive does not mean best, is now the first advanced Western fighter that can be sold, operated, maintained, and upgraded with 0 American dependency.